Welcome to the Enneagram Narrative in Your Life series, a free webinar series from Enneagram Studies in the Narrative Tradition, an educational nonprofit. I'm Terry Saracino, and I'm filling in tonight as host for Liz Newcomer, who has recently had a little baby boy. We wish Liz and her family the best. So I will be hosting and facilitating this program tonight. We are finishing the series on love and relationships, and tonight we will be focusing on the Body Center. A recording of this webinar will be available in about a week on our website, enneagramworldwide.com, and then after that, it will be available for sale in our online store. The format for this evening will be a brief introduction by me about the Enneagram, the use of relationships, and the Body Center. And then we will have a panel interview with a representative from each of the three types of the Body Center. We teach the Enneagram in the narrative tradition, and this is what excites me after all these years of teaching the Enneagram, is being able to hear about the Enneagram from people who represent each of the types. I want to thank them all now for their participation and giving us of their time and their experiences with this Enneagram. So I'd like to start by introducing Jorge Soto, who will be representing Type 8, the Protector. Welcome and thank you, Jorge. I think you're on mute.
Hi, everyone. I'm very glad to be here.
Jorge is an industrial engineer, entrepreneur, and business owner. He came across the Enneagram 4 years ago and found it helpful in bettering his relationships with his intimates, business associates, and friends. He is an active member and circling facilitator at the Integral Center in Boulder, and holds the Enneagram as an evolutionary system towards greater awareness and wholeness. Thank you again, Jorge. We'll talk with you again a little later. I would now like to introduce a representative of Type 9, the Mediator, which is Sarah Walston from Seattle, Washington. Sarah, welcome.
Thanks, Terry. I'm glad to be here with you.
Glad to have you. Sarah is a licensed mental health counselor and certified Enneagram teacher in the narrative tradition. She's an Enneagram coach and teacher and has worked deeply with the Enneagram for 18 years. As owner of 9 Site Enneagram for Transformation, it's Sarah's joy to help people create lives their souls are longing for. Again, really thank you for joining us tonight. And finally, I'd like to introduce Maria Candler, who is our representative Type 1, the Perfectionist, from Richmond, Virginia. Welcome, Maria.
Hi, Terry. Looking forward to this. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, me too. Maria is a wife, mother of 2, and business owner. She first came upon the Enneagram when some consultants, and I think I know who they might have been, snuck it into her sales process training course. 4 years later, after seeing and personally experiencing great results, both at work and in her personal life, she's decided to seek professional certification to share this opportunity with others. Again, I really want to thank you, Maria, for joining us. After the panel interviews, there will be time for questions and answers. So as you think of questions during this webinar, please use the Q&A icon to send those to our webmaster, Evangeline Welch, who will be monitoring the questions and helping us out if there are any technical difficulties. We will not be using the raise hand or the chat feature tonight. So I'm going to transition now from host to facilitator and just take a breath as I ask you all to join me in just taking a breath as we transition here. And let me just say a few words about how I got interested in the Enneagram. In 1989, I was in the middle of a career transition, having been both a high school math teacher and a corporate manager in the telecommunications industry. And I was literally consciously looking for my heart's desire because I'd always done whatever with the next thing that showed up. And a friend of mine invited a woman from Santa Fe to Denver to teach a workshop on the Enneagram. And you got to remember, in those days, this was 1989, we didn't have webinars, we didn't have online courses. There were 3 books out. So I went to this workshop, and this woman started talking at 7 o'clock on Friday night and talked all the way to Sunday. And in the course of that weekend, I knew I'd found my life's work. Patterns that I'd had for years made sense to me. Patterns of my family and friends made sense to me. And I knew I'd found my work. As a 6 on the Enneagram, a loyal skeptic, doubt is a common element in my life. And I can tell you that one thing I've never doubted is that the Enneagram is my life's work. Right after I took that course, I started teaching the Enneagram to my friends and family and basically anyone who would listen. I started an Enneagram Center in Denver. Then I joined Helen Palmer and David Daniels as a teacher in their professional training program, which is based on the narrative tradition of people speaking from their own experience, which again makes the Enneagram come alive. I then founded the Enneagram Studies in the Narrative Tradition nonprofit, and I'm currently a core faculty member. I've taught the Enneagram in the United States and over the world to a variety of audiences and find it just the most amazing map, and when applied with psychological, spiritual, and somatic methods is an incredible tool for transformation. So tonight, our focus is going to be on relationships. But let me just say a few words about the Enneagram in case we have any newbies on our webinar tonight. There's a ton of information on our website about the Enneagram, but in a nutshell, it's a system of 9 patterns of thinking and feeling and behaving. We all have one. It's part of our evolutionary development to have a pattern. We couldn't get by without it. At the same time, when we bring awareness to it, we have a lot more freedom. Until that time, we act automatically. We don't really know that we're paying attention to different cues that other people are paying attention to. And when we recognize that our pattern is different than others, and when we recognize our patterns going on automatic, we have a chance, we have some choice. We learn that actually we're really more than these patterns. And underneath the patterns, you might call it grace, you might call it the ground of being, you might call it essential qualities, but elements arise that are not just our automatic pattern, and we can live life more close to the ground of being, or however you might describe that. This is the spiritual aspect of the Enneagram, which is really the nuts and bolts and keeps us ever growing with this system. So tonight we're going to be focusing on relationships. And how many of you have ever tried to change someone else? I can't see your hands, but I expect many of you have. How well did that work? Not really well, most likely. Virginia Satir once said, "The chance of irritability in any relationship is 100%. So to the extent we have these other people in our lives, which we all do in our work, in our home, we're going to disagree or see things differently from time to time. If we just knew the Enneagram at that level, that there's 8 other patterns that are equally valid to our own, that would be enough. So we see the logic and the wisdom actually in each of these 8 other patterns, and it helps us have compassion and understanding. Our attention, we each view the world through a different lens, and when we really can recognize that, we can appreciate what everyone has to bring and not take our differences so personally. And the real work of relationship is about using this system to know ourselves better, to when we have that conflict and when we want to point the finger at the other person, to come back inside and say, whoa, pause. What's happening in me? What part of my pattern is being triggered right now? If I can do that and stop in the middle of a conflict, imagine what can happen in the world. I can become centered, I can go inside, I can see what's really happening, and the charge that I have about this and wanting to change the other person and make something different happen goes away. I can become centered, and then if I need to, I can go back and I can greet that person from a different place inside. The world would change in big ways if we could all do this. So what I want to do now is just lead us in a little inner practice, because we need an inner observer to be able to do this. So this part of us is separate from our type, and it helps us distance from this automatic pattern. So I invite you all to close your eyes for a moment and just take a breath. In this moment, we are choosing to place our attention, instead of in the outside world, on our breath. So just follow this breath now. Turning our attention in from our usual outside focus. In and down. Where we can become more receptive. Where our pattern can be on pause for a moment. And we can cultivate some space to observe. To observe what's happening. Imagine a recent scenario where you had a conflict or a disagreement with someone. And imagine if you could observe yourself and know your pattern enough to say, time out. I'm having a reaction. I need some time. And you could pause and come inside and understand what's being triggered in you. And have a little more understanding and maybe compassion for where the other person might be coming from. And let the charge, the energy, dissipate. So that then you could go back and say, oh wow, this is what was happening for me. Let's try again. So now just take a couple of breaths and bring your attention back to this webinar. And I'm just going to say a few sentences about the body center. The Enneagram is divided into 3 centers. We've already had the webinars on the head center and the heart center. And the body center is the center that the 3 types whose energy is in the belly, in the gut. These are the types that are more in tune with the sensate world, with the kinesthetic experience. A 9 friend of mine, before I knew the Enneagram, once said, so-and-so's feeling such and such. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And she said, I said, how do you know that? She said, I felt it in my body. And as a head type back then, I didn't know I had a body. So I was like, whoa, that's different kind of information. Body types often talk about having a sense of things. They also can be kind of binary in terms of it's right or wrong, it's good or bad, it's black or white. And they're interested in their place in the world. And they go through with this sensate experience, sort of testing things out, a gut sense of things, guided by physical cues and felt certainty. And consciously or unconsciously, this center is influenced by anger. So we're going to move now into the first interview. So we'll start with type 8, and I'm going to say a few words to introduce type 8, which is the protector, and then we'll ask Jorge about his experience with relationships. So the 8, the energy, body center types are in touch with the energy of the life force. And this is the type that's in touch with a lot of energy. 8s have a lot of forward-moving energy. It gives them great enthusiasm, decisive action. They can get things done. And on the flip side, sometimes they don't realize the impact of this energy because it's just the water they live in. It's just the water they swim in. They don't know that this energy can be too much and sometimes overwhelm people. Their attention goes to power and control. So Jorge, what I'd like to ask you is, how does this strategy help you in your relationships? What are the gifts and challenges? What are the gifts? What are the challenges? And how has knowing the Enneagram helped you in your relationships? Over to you.
Thank you, Terry. So, yes, what you said really lands. And I have been transformed by watching myself using the Enneagram app a lot. So basically what I learned about myself is that I have like two kind of patterns going on in relation to others. One is when I get when I get in contact with my desire. So in general, let's start from that point. Normally I feel the emotions really strong. I feel things very, very strong all the time. That can be anything, any emotion. Could be sadness, could be excitement, could be happiness, could be whatever. I feel it very strong. So the first thing that happens is that when I get excited and I want to follow my desire, then in a point, I notice that people weren't okay with me following my desire, because in a point I collapse with other people's desires or rights or needs or whatever. Or I want to follow my own desire or my own need.
So tell me a little why they weren't okay with your desire, do you think?
In a point, we're going to cross each other's boundaries.
Right.
Okay, so in the point where I'm going to crossing others people's boundaries, then the mechanism that I used to have is to get numb about my shame. So I'm unaware of the impact. I used to do that as a mechanism of just shutting down the shame completely. So I come across like shameless.
Right.
So that blind me for many, many, many years until I came across the Enneagram. And then I realized, like, oh my God, like I was putting the shame to the shadow side so I could keep doing what I wanted.
Right.
So that's kind of one pattern.
Okay, so let me just say something. So what you're saying is that you didn't realize your impact, that you had this intensity, that you came across this way. You were just being you, right?
Yes.
And you didn't know how big it was sometimes and how it might have dominated. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And then the other pattern that was talked about is that is very big for me and was very big when I discovered it and began to watch it, is to how sensitive I am to the emotions that I learned to not be okay with. So as a man, I was taught it's not okay for you to cry. It's not okay for you to be loving. It's not okay to be, to feel ashamed. So when I felt those, they came so strong. And then as an 8, I have a problem with vulnerability. So I don't want others to see any of that. So what I do when I feel sadness, I go like, I don't feel anything. Then people will, but I'm just blocking that. And it happened for so many years that I even forgot that I was feeling those emotions.
Yeah.
Until I begin to peel the Enneagram and through the Enneagram begin to peel those layers, and then by embodying my own vulnerability and acknowledging and coming across like, okay, so there's one thing that I want to say. And that still happens to me even today, that when I feel sad or hurt by somebody because I have a story of whatever, and then I feel sad or hurt or fear, then my instant reaction is anger.
Right.
So I come across like with immediate anger to stop that, because I don't want to show that I'm sad, that I'm scared. So my practice for years has become, when I caught myself in anger, I always stop and say, okay, what's underneath? And it's always sad or a fear.
Yeah.
And then my exercise is to speak from that sadness or to speak from that fear. And then what happens on the other side is that I get connection because I'm being vulnerable at that point.
Beautiful. I just want to say how you're describing the 8 pattern with the difficulty of being vulnerable, and then knowing this information about the Enneagram and looking what's underneath so that you can actually be vulnerable and get the connection you're seeking that you thought you could get with all this energy. Is that right?
Yes, and I'm very excited because in the past, my drive for wanting the connection, for wanting to play, was clouded by not seeing, because I was not being informed by shame, so I was basically shameless. So I was blind, wanting to do the thing, and then I was just watching the broken glass. I didn't know why I was being left alone.
Right. So I want to say, you're using the word shame to describe, in the beginning, you didn't want to own anything about your impact in the relationship, right?
Yes, I didn't.
You couldn't see that it was maybe too much or maybe hurt people. So that was way underneath, right?
Yes.
And now you're saying that you can catch the anger, which is the emotion that arises, and pause, like I did in the little inner practice. And
yes.
then speak from that softer place inside.
Yes.
Yes. And so what are the gifts that this is bringing to your relationships?
A lot of connection. Because if I come across like, hey, I feel sad when I hear you say this, the other person kind of, then now it's on the other side. Maybe it was something that I did. So maybe it was a consequence of something I did, and then owning and welcoming my own shame, which is something new. So I really like my relationship to shame now, because I had like no relationship to shame. What does is that informs, maybe I'm doing something that is not in alignment with my values or with what I really want. So coming from shameless person to just beginning to have a relationship with shame, it kind of informs me that. So both those two things together just bring me so much connection, which is what I wanted in the first place.
Yeah, isn't that great? That's beautiful. I mean, you've really given us a beautiful description of your journey with the Enneagram and how it's helped you actually get the connection you want.
Yes.
Is there any final thing you want to say before I move on to type 9?
Yeah, it depends. I had a little example that I don't know if I use all my time.
Well, you've got 1 minute.
I don't think it's going to make it.
Well, try.
A little story. Okay. So I want to say that it took me probably 3 years of therapy to notice in myself, and that was a year ago that I got it, or a year and a half ago, to notice the vengeance, which is one of the characteristics in my personality. And I was looking in the wrong place, because I thought it was, no, I'm not vengeance. I'm not going to kick you back if you kick me my mistake or something like that. It was emotional. So I noticed then when I feel hurt, or then my vengeance come across like, I'm going to hurt you back, but it was unconscious, completely unconscious. So it took me years to notice some of the patterns, because as I grow and I become more more whole, what happens is that those patterns begin to become more spiritual.
Right.
So they're harder to spot, but they're still there. It's like a signature that is always with me, that probably when I was 14 years old, I will fight back.
Right.
I was always fighting, literally, fist fight.
Right.
And then as that I evolved, now it's more like, you shame me, I'm going to shame you back if I'm not aware.
Right. Right.
So yeah, so
what you're saying again is we all grow and we become freer of these patterns, and we're all human, and that pathway is still there, but with more awareness, it comes up less and less, and we're more closer to the ground to receive the spiritual grace, or however you would call that, right?
yes, yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Jorge. I really appreciate it. We'll come back later when we get to questions and answers, okay?
Okay.
All right. All right, so let's take a breath, and as we transition to our type 9, the mediator, we'll be talking with Sarah. And let me say a few words about the type 9. So again, a body-based type, the type 9 at the top of the Enneagram, their energy, instead of up and forward like we experienced with the 8, it more gets dispersed out into the world, and the 9's pattern of going along to get along and seeing the needs of others, and in bringing an incredibly accepting and harmonious and non-judgmental perspective to relationships. The flip side of that is accommodating others' needs. They lose track of their own, and they can avoid conflict and not be able to say what they want. And so there can be kind of a stubbornness because of the desire to avoid conflict, but not really say what's going on, which can influence relationships. So let's hear from Sarah about the challenges and the strengths of the 9's relationship, and also how using the Enneagram, learning the Enneagram has helped you in your relationships.
Yeah, I could say so many things. So I just sort of intuitively, I'm going to let initial impressions come forward, and you can help me refine those if they're too dispersed. So I would say one of the easy gifts that I bring in relationship that many people I know who are 9 bring is just this very natural compassion and empathy. I can feel into the other in a way that is automatic, and it's not there's no effort to it. And in fact, I have to sometimes reel myself back from doing it because it's so easy for me to feel into the other. And so because I do that in a way that wants to understand, I usually can see people's good intentions, and I usually can feel, where we're missing each other, sort of natural in bridging conflict. I also think as a 9, one thing I bring to relationships is groundedness or a steadfast presence and availability to the other when I'm at my best. 9s can also be kind of checked out, but I think in general, I want to be there with you and for you. And so that just is. And people like to be around that a lot. So the work for the 9, the challenges show up kind of after you hang out with a 9 for a little while and you have to live with them.
Right. They're not evident right away.
Right. Well, especially if you just know them casually and they're just pleasant to be around and they don't judge you. And, it's kind of easy because 9 is specializing in being easy to get along with. Yeah. But this strategy, of course, creates problems in getting along. So I'll say a few things about some of the challenges. There are a number, but this going along with others and feeling into others naturally kind of leaves myself in the dust. Like my opinions, my needs, my wants, without trying, just get dimmed or submerged in my attention going out. So when I lose that track of myself, as a usual 9, I might not even know that I'm doing that. But when that's not online, other people feel like I'm not really there, like they don't know if I care about them. It's challenging for me when I'm in that state to know whether my needs are important to the other. The story I tell myself is that I'm not, even if, cognitively I kind of know better. It feels like, I don't know if anybody cares about me. So that's a downside. And this conflict avoidance that you mentioned is also, that can show up in a lot of ways. It can show up in focusing elsewhere than what really needs to be addressed. It can show up in, I'm not mad at you, we never fight. Or it can show up with, kind of digs. But ultimately, as a 9, what I'm on autopilot to do is to avoid getting in the position where you're mad at me.
So what's difficult about conflict, Sarah? What's so difficult about conflict?
Yeah. When I'm in the trance of 9, what conflict looks like is massive disconnect and alienation. Like we're lost from each other.
Mm-hmm. So there's a fear of disconnection.
Yeah. And it feels existential. It's not just like disconnect in the moment on a, topic we're discussing. It feels massive. It feels like the only thing that's tethering us together is this harmonious flow we have going on. And if I lose that, if I can't control that with my little machinations of dimming myself, then you might have no reason to love me or relate to me.
So you're bringing up something that's really important, that for each of the types, we have this core belief that our type pattern feels like if this doesn't happen, then I'm probably going to die and not survive. And so for the 9 is if I don't have this connection outside, I'm not going to make it. But I know you know more about that so tell us what you've discovered about that.
Well, one of the ways the Enneagram has been especially good mirror for me is to increase my capacity to sit with that distress and to outlast it.
Yeah.
Or to question it, to bring it, to ask at a basic level, what if I'm wrong about that?
And what have you discovered?
Well, I'm wrong all the time about that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And my type pattern will keep presenting it to me, in varying degrees. Maybe it will be a little bit more clever and subtle sometimes in the way that it inserts it. But it's that, especially if you think about it in a primary relationship, it's like kind of asinine to think that you're not important, because even if the person doesn't like you in the moment, you're totally having a huge impact on them and they care about that.
Right.
And then, like learning about my story about that disconnection and conflict, the Enneagram has helped me feel curious about conflict. Mm-hmm. And like it's a call to find myself, wow, to engage, to notice that something matters, and that, there's an opportunity for a different kind of, I'll call it truer connection, where we can feel the difference and we can notice the gap and be okay with that. And when I do that, it undoes this other belief, right? It says, oh, we can have difference, and we don't have to be seeing eye to eye, and there can still be love, and there can still be value, and it's not undone.
Right. And you're part of the relationship.
Yeah.
So that's what those of us in relationship with 9, we want you to be there too. And I know for you, then it feels truer too, because you're bringing your gifts and who you are to the relationship. So it's a win-win all around when that belief of only being connected by going along to get along can be loosened up, as you say, can be put aside for a minute to actually feel your own value in relationship. Is there any final thing you'd like to say before I move on to our final panelist?
One thing that I think could be important for some people, especially in relationship with nines, or if you're a nine in relationship, is how surprising it is to nines that they're causing conflict all the time with their pattern. You know, it's a real blind spot that this approach to trying to steer clear of conflict creates all kinds of conflict. So I'd invite people in relationship with nines to feel validated about that. but for the nines out there, you know, what if you got curious about whether this setup is really working for you in the way that you think it is?
Thank you so much for that, Sarah, because it is curious. And I actually heard a nine on a panel one time say, I actually realized finally how being nice all the time wasn't actually a good thing. Going along wasn't actually a good thing because I wasn't really showing up. So I really appreciate you putting that out there, and for all of us in relationship with nines and for the nines themselves to consider that question. That's great. Thank you.
You bet.
All right. So I'm going to move now to our final panelist who represents type 1, the perfectionist, Maria. And let me just say a few words about the type 1. Again, a body center type. But here, the energy, the gut, the instinctual energy gets cut off as the type develops and moves to the head in a certain way and is co-opted by what we call the inner critic, where there's a belief that I'm only going to be loved if I'm perfect according to the standard of my inner critic, which is different from everyone, for everyone. So the great ones bring great gifts of responsibility and wanting to do a good job. They're responsible, improvement-oriented. But this inner critic can be so dominating that they can't turn it off to themselves, and it can affect other people in their relationships. And so it can, wanting to do a good job, again, can actually be a hindrance because there's no place for the one to relax and just trust the flow as it happens. So Maria, will you tell us about the strengths and gifts of your relationship, being a one, and challenges, and how the Enneagram has helped you?
Sure. Well, I always, when I think about the gifts and the strengths, that list is almost the same as the weak spots. And I think that the thing that I've learned through the Enneagram is just showing up differently with that, and that determines if it's used for good or evil, really. So, you know, a great example is, you know, just being a parent. You know, my daughter would bring home an A on a test, but it's not 100. And when my sort of unnatural or natural unfiltered state, I would immediately go to question 4 and how come, and, you know, and then just, you know, shut her down. And so I think the journey has really taught me to still be able to work on improvement and making things better, but without alienating all the people that I love. You know, I think I didn't realize how angry I was. If you had asked me 4 or 5 years ago, are you angry? I would say I'm never angry. But actually, I think I lived off of anger to some extent. And I think it was that inner critic that, you know, when I couldn't control every single thing, because perfection is an impossibility, when I couldn't control every single thing, that inner critic would just get to me to the point where I would just start to sit that on everyone around me, just the constant nitpicking and, you know, this and that. And so the outcome of that moment in time is, you know, everyone around me sort of, you can never make her happy. Don't even bother. She's never satisfied. I am not conflict avoidant, and I'm married to a 9, so this is definitely something that comes up often. And another good example of how, you know, I think I can still use the greater good of the one without alienating is, you know, I don't avoid conflict. My husband would probably say, in retrospect, I appreciate that you don't avoid conflict. But he would say, you know, when we're in conflict, you sort of have this hidden you idiot that comes up after every sentence. And so, so there's sort of this self-righteous, steamy anger, very condescending approach to things in my sort of unhealthier pre-Enneagram days. And so, I think, both of the panelists have said just this sort of curiosity about, being curious about judgment and criticism of myself that then transfers to others has just been the most amazing and freeing part of this. And also, I never really knew how to breathe. That's sort of the thing I'm coming upon now, is that I would only take the shallowest of breaths, like just enough breath to be alive. And so, really, that has just really given me the space to explore the rest of the Enneagram, to learn more about, what I feel is a very strong line to 7 that allows me to work on this problem of relaxing and playing, which is great homework for a 1 to try to learn how to relax and play.
Right.
That's the best part of the journey.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me just say, you've said so many powerful statements, Maria. One is that, the strengths and weaknesses are the same. It really depends on where you are inside. So I want to say to everyone, it's not that these types are bad or wrong, but as Maria is describing, it shows us limitations. And Jorge and Sarah also described, if this is all we can do, then we're pretty limited. So when, again, as they've all described, we can bring awareness to it, and we can pause and breathe, and Maria can actually get into her belly, you have more choice. And you can use the gifts of the pattern in a different way and not be so stuck in the parts that feel like you have to have them for survival. For the 1, it's if I'm not perfect, I'm not going to be loved when the type pattern is operating. What do you know about that now, Maria?
Well, I absolutely can tell the difference in my connection with my loved ones. I mean, there's no comparison. My daughter, just in preparation for this, because I need to get this right, I have to nail this as a 1. But just asking her, what's different? And she even mentioned the anger. You're not as angry as you used to be. And I've never had a better relationship with my family than I have now. So, yeah, it's been remarkable, really.
Well, and as I said in the beginning, the body center types, anger is at the core of all of them, but anger is an emotion that can help us lead us back to ourselves. So as you've worked with the anger inside yourself, instead of trying to fix the outside world, it's helped you do what? It's helped you, how has that helped you?
Well, I mean, just being aware of it, I think I'm just naturally less angry. I diffuse faster. It's in fact, and sometimes just seeking humor in it. Just.
Oh, here it is again.
Yeah.
Here it is again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So are there any final comments you would like to say? What else has the Enneagram brought to you, knowing it?
Well, I just think it's given me peace with myself. The blessing to just be emotional, to not feel like you have to drive so hard charging all the time, to be balanced, to just enjoy life and all the imperfections. There's so much beauty in that when you are able to loosen it and breathe and just be, and be more observant and less feeling like you have to just run this exhausting game of fixing everything. Life can be so beautiful in those moments.
It's beautiful to hear you say that. I can feel it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you, all of our panelists. And now we're going to see if there are any questions that have come in. So let me see here. So there's a question, an anonymous question. I forgot to say, if you're going to ask a question, if you want to put your name in, where you're from, that would be great. But this one is anonymous for you, Jorge. So be sure to unmute. Are you in an intimate relationship? If so, how has working with your 8 energy impacted your relationship with your partner? How do you express your vulnerability when challenges come up?
It took me time to master. It's one of the things that I keep working on them, and sometimes I fail. What it is it resonated a lot what you said about anger, that reminding me to come back to myself. So when I do that, what I do is to stop and force myself to not speak from anger, just to say thank you for bringing me. So I put it aside and I say thank you. I appreciate you wanting to protect me. And now I'm going to choose to speak from sadness or from fear or from anything else. And then I speak from that place. But that is an effort. And the beauty of relationships, but my partner knows that I'm doing that. So when she noticed that I'm not coming from that place and she's noticing anger, then she reminds me, like, are you angry? Are you angry right now? And then I go like, okay, yeah. Then I drop in and I speak from that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Again, just because we know the patterns, I want to say to the person that asked this question, doesn't mean they're going to stop. And so Jorge's
it takes time.
It takes time
Practice.
and practice. And when our partner can support us in that, like his partner saying to him, are you angry now? I mean, just think if we could all do this, right?
I wouldn't notice without a relationship.
Right.
Relationships are I see it as in service of my own awareness.
Yes, absolutely. And then helping everyone around you too.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, I have another anonymous question for Sarah. I was in a relationship with a 9 and thought we had a good relationship because we never argued. I didn't know that he was truly unhappy until it was too late. How do you express your needs in a primary relationship, and how would you advise someone with a 9 partner to encourage more honest communication, especially in times of conflict?
There's a few questions in there. I'll try to respond to a couple of the pieces. Expressing needs in relationship can be a challenge in and of itself for a 9. It depends on their level of awareness and the dynamic between you. I would say in terms of someone who's not the 9, expressing needs toward the 9, to do so, to strive to do it in a way that leaves options is a good idea. Like, would you be willing? This would be interesting to me. How does that sound to you? Just to be a little bit more 9-ish in the way you put it forward, so that there can be a moment of consciousness invited, whether the 9 can do it or not. They could feel for a moment, how does that sound to me? You know, if you're in a desperate place, that's going to be hard. In terms of inviting a 9 to bring their needs forward, it's tricky. Sometimes you have to refine your little antenna toward the hints that they might be giving off, that they might not even know about. Like, you know, when their energy slumps, you know, they're doing something with you, but they're kind of checked out. You might wonder, you might help, if you're somebody who's good at knowing what your needs are, you might be able to help translate that for them. They may or may not be able to meet you there. I think there are other parts of the question that I might not be touching on.
Well, that's good for now. Thank you. Also, still a participant asks, 9s don't seem angry. What are 9s angry about?
Well, on the first level as a 9, I don't feel anger personally often when I'm kind of asleep to it. So yeah, many 9s would say, I'm not an angry person. Yeah. In the Enneagram, the way it's understood is that anger is organizing the personality, specifically in my stopping of it. And then on a sort of more Like I want to manage the anger, and I don't want to be angry at 9. And the deeper anger in me is about counting myself out, or not following what my whole organism is asking me to do in terms of my needs or my preferences or what I care about. It's easy to feel like anger as a 9 about social justice issues or somebody treating somebody else badly. I can feel this instant kind of, it's probably one of my 8 or 1 kind of fire comes through because it's not about me.
Right.
But when it's about me, it's real hard to bring that forward. Some 9s will blow their tops, but that's not usually the case for me.
Right. And again, it's sort of like 9s can be angry that other people aren't paying attention to them, but what Sarah's really saying is the core is a lack of paying attention to yourself and putting yourself in the picture for fear of this lack of connection.
Right. It's a real conundrum, paradox. Yeah.
Each of the types has its own paradox, and that one you've just described beautifully. I have a question now for Maria. Any suggestions for supportive ways to be with my one wife? At times she is miserable because she so misses her kids during the Christmas season. They all live 3,000 miles away. What would you suggest?
I guess my first inclination is to distract her with a fix-it project. I think for myself, I didn't realize how important a real intense connection is. And I think 1s don't often make time for that or nurture that. And so we can sometimes be left blindsided, maybe as an empty nester, when you haven't, taken the time to nurture yourself or hobbies or just make time for yourself and your own needs. So I think maybe delicately helping her find ways to take care of herself and to maybe be in better connection with her, to make her feel like she really matters, and give her that sort of gentle push.
Right, and also just to support her in her feelings of missing, I would add, her children, to give space for that, because sometimes it's hard for one to have their feelings,
right,
because the critic comes in so fast and says it's not okay.
Yeah, emotionality is something I had to really work to be okay with, openly feeling sad, and to be kind to myself in that process. So that's an excellent point to validate that.
Right.
Give space for that.
Good. Thank you. We have one more question. Danielle from New Jersey. I'm a 9 mediator, and my partner is a 6, a loyal skeptic. I've found that I often get anxiety, not just when I confront others, but when my partner confronts others. I'm not sure if that is typical, but I was hoping that someone might have advice on how I can let go of my fear of watching others confront people. Sarah, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. I think it probably is typical. It's a common experience for me when I see conflict in the world. All my attention gets sucked right there and wants to mend it. So, it's an energetic magnet for me when there's difficulty going on in the field. And in terms of letting go of the fear, I would say maybe just starting by checking it out. Where do you feel it in your body? Can you breathe and tolerate the fear? Can you sort of stay in yourself when that's going on in the field? Can you feel your feet on the floor? Is there a possibility of not totally like letting all your attention go over to that situation? For the 9, a lot of times, because there is an access to the ground that can come kind of naturally when I'm at home, when I'm here, that's one of the first and best ways to practice when you're uncomfortable, is to see if I can get back in my body and not let it all scatter out elsewhere.
So it goes back also to what I said when we did that little inner practice in the beginning, is when you notice your fear of the conflict out there with your 6 partner, come back inside, as Sarah's saying. This is where we have to do our own work. The real work of the Enneagram is working on ourselves and these patterns. So we're going to just take a couple more questions. We have a question. We have an anonymous viewer who is a 9 with an 8 husband. So I would like to hear from both the 9 and the 8. I'm always getting frustrated with his high energy toward his desires because it overshadows my wants and desires. How would Sarah deal with Jorge and Jorge deal with Sarah? So Jorge, let's go to you first.
How would I deal with
a 9 partner that doesn't express her desires at the level that you have?
It's a hard question for me. I guess that if I was with the 9, I would definitely try to tune in into how does she react when her needs are not being met, to kind of get some clues, or where do I have to really check and ask. Is this, and one of the things that I would suggest, that I would do, and I do that with 9 friends, is that when I notice that they don't know what they want, I give them time, or I ask, what do you don't want? To kind of discard like a whole range of things, and kind of give them time to make sure that they're okay, and not to override that and have my way without being sure that I know that she's enrolled in whatever it is that we're wanting to do.
Good. So you pause. Yeah, you pause and check it out. Good. Sarah, over to you. What would you say to this 9 who is frustrated with the high energy of her 8 husband?
Yeah, I have a few ideas. So first of all, I'd be interested to know if the 8 knows he's an 8 and whether he's interested in knowing about the Enneagram, because that can disarm a lot of the charge if we can name what the dance is. Like, I'm the kind of person that's really hard to bring it forward, and you're the kind of person that's really natural for. How can we make a plan around this? When you speak plainly about something like that, my experience is that 8s are interested, right? It's like, here's the matter at hand, and how do we make a win-win situation? It's not that easy, but so that's the first piece. The second would be for the self. What if you could do a little work on your own to be ready to, even if it's faking it, like say what you want, like maybe you want something a little bit, and you practice something that you're not super invested in, but just like, I really want pizza tonight, whatever, like just see how it is to work with that differential in the energy. But the other, you can hear it in my energy, like 8, in the way Jorge was talking about kind of being numb to the subtler emotions, and 9 is kind of super tuned up to that in the other. It's like sometimes 9 can amp it up when it matters, and that will register better for the 8. They'll feel ya. It's like, if it's about something that matters to you, practice like really being in your body and turning up your physical energy. Lean in, use your voice, and that might be challenging, but if you have an 8 who's kind of tuned out, you're going to need to show up on the radar, and that's good for you too.
Right. It's coming out of it's for each of us as we grow with the Enneagram and we grow with our partners, it's coming out of your own comfort zone. It's stretching yourself a little to inhabit their shoes, to try to do it a little bit differently. Those are great examples. Sarah. Okay, so one final question. There's lots of questions coming in, but this will be the last one for you, Maria. How's it best to relate to a 1 who does not know the Enneagram and is unaware of the impact her criticism has on the prevailing atmosphere? Often she flips to self-criticism if someone suggests another way of looking at a situation.
Well, I think for me, the big attention getter, you know, I always really did want feedback from people. This is the irony. And my approach inhibited people from really giving that to me. So I think one's really, they want to do the right thing. And so if you can find a loving way to describe what what you're experiencing. When the people in my life, you know, started to feel comfortable enough to really share what their experiences were like with me, being with me, it really made a difference. It really did. You know, I didn't want to be that kind of a parent. I didn't want to be that kind of a mother. So, but you know, you will get really defensive. So, you know, you really have to kind of think through with supporting examples, as detailed as you can deliver the message. You know, I think there, you know, there's openness. You know, you sort of speak to their need to get it right, to be better. You know.
And also with a lot of care, a lot of, you know, I really care about you. I care about our relationship. And
right, because we just want to be valued, and you know, we come at it by trying to be good and right all the time, and but at the end, it's just about being loved and valued. So,
thank you. I just want to add to the one viewer who asked, are you one type or are you many? We have one core type, and the Enneagram describes ways that we have influence from other types, but we really have one core type around which our personality is organized, and we have more on our website about that. So I just want to say thank you to our panelists. We could go on all night with questions and answers, but we're going to have to move on now. And I just want to take a moment to share with our viewers how to get information from our website if you're interested in more of our programs. So if you click on our programs tab, our website is enneagramworldwide.com. If you click on programs and the calendar, then what you'll see in the right-hand column is a list of all of our programs that are coming up in date order. And then on the left-hand side, there are several ways that you can search. You can search by what type of program it is, color-coded. I'll say more about that in a minute. You can search by zip code. You can search by core faculty. So there's many ways to find things on our website. And in terms of our programs, just let me say a couple of words. We have a core program that has 3 courses that give you a basic foundation of the Enneagram and the narrative tradition. And then if you'd like to use the Enneagram in your work, we have 2 certification tracks. One is for people who are professionals that want to use it in their one-on-one relationships, therapists, coaches, spiritual directors. And then we also, if you want to teach the Enneagram, we have a narrative teachers track. Maria is currently in the narrative professionals track, and Sarah is a teacher in the narrative tradition. And then if you want to use the Enneagram for your personal growth, we have narrative learning communities. So in a few days, hang on a minute, let me stop this. You will be, actually tomorrow you'll be receiving an email with a link. If you want to view the webinar again, it'll be available in about a week. And we encourage you to share this with your family and friends. And sometimes this is a good way to get people interested that aren't interested. And it's a non-threatening way. And hearing people talk about their own experiences can help overcome some of those barriers. It will be available through the end of 2016, and then it will be available in our online store. I just want to go back and say, earlier I was talking about we have these personality patterns, but it's not all of who we are. And when we can loosen those patterns, we can actually pause and respond to situations differently with more love and compassion, which we heard from all of our participants, which helps us and it helps the people in our lives. And we really need this now. If we could all work together to be more compassionate, our world would be a better place for all of us. Again, I want to give my heartfelt thanks to Jorge and Sarah and Maria. You bring the Enneagram alive, and I'm very grateful. And I want to thank our audience for tuning in. Good night.